This team is going to look familiar if you just watch the other top 4 match, including Shiliang Tang. Justin Tang, the other partner in building this team, is going to be using the exact same 6. We don't entirely know if the way that these Pokemon are trained are quite the same, but you will see the same moves, the same Terras, and the same held items for these Pokemon.
Right, same Pokemon, but now up against a different type of team. Means we're going to see different aspects, different parts of the team. The last game really had a focus on Trick Room and on using the Glacial Lance. I think that could be a really strong path through this game if you have Pokemon like Whimsicott, Ting-Lu, and Calyrex on the other side. But there's also the potential to flip the speed recipe. I think Tailwind from Roaring Moon could be really powerful in this game as well. It could help get above Calyrex Shadow Rider's speed with some of your Pokemon like Urshifu. And Roaring Moon matches up very well into Shadow Rider on its own because of the resistance to Ghost and the threat of knockoff.
Taking a look at the fact that Dawei does have Tailwind, I'm a bit more inclined to think that Justin, in order to get those speeds in his favor, would go for something a bit more like the Trick Room instead. But that doesn't mean that you can't rely on anything else, because you have to cover for so many different things on Dawei's team.
The Whimsicott feels so difficult to bring as well because it's so poor into the Ice Rider and then doesn't match up into the support Pokemon or the fast Pokemon that well either. Roaring Moon, Ogerpon would love to just throw one-hit KOs into this Whimsicott that doesn't have Focus Sash. Whereas at the slower pace of Dawei's team, Dondozo matches up fairly well if it can dodge Sleep from Amoonguss on the other side. Ting-Lu could be pretty valuable, but it might become a Terra Hog because you have to get it out of the Glacial Lance weakness or the Horn Leech weakness from Ogerpon on the other side. But they also, using those 2 Pokemon will help stymie any Trick Room offense and makes Trick Room from Justin very difficult to use because both of them may be slower than the Calyrex Ice Rider if Trick Room goes up. And so Trick Room might become very much about using the Amoonguss. Now Amoonguss has pretty good potential, especially if you don't think Whimsicott is coming to the match and there's only one Grass type and no safety goggles or Grass Terastallizations. So again, ripe opportunity for Spore, which has been one of the storylines of this tournament, how powerful Amoonguss has felt, surging to number 2 in usage in day 2. This is another matchup that really feels like it could be powerful for Amoonguss. But one detail on the Calyrex Shadow Rider, a lot of them have a different coverage move to deal with normal types. Dawei has Psychic with Life Orb, just would immediately threaten a one-hit KO into the Amoonguss as well and might force a Terastallization out of it. And so at least the right tools to slow down Amoonguss before Trick Room is up.
Positioning going to be key. As we see the leads, we can start to get a better picture of how this match is going to shake out. Dawei leading with the Ogerpon Hearthflame and the Calyrex Shadow as Justin matches that with the Roaring Moon and Urshifu.
The Ogerpon and the Calyrex Shadow Rider would be the perfect leads to go up against the Trick Room part of this. They fare so much worse against this Tailwind view of Justin's team. Whether it's a threat of Tailwind and Surging Strikes into either of these Pokemon, or Roaring Moon just going out on the offense its own with knockoff. Justin is in the driver's seat here. Dawei has tools with Follow Me or just attacking and using a defensive Terastallization, but for now just a Protect from one side and Follow Me from the other.
Follow Me from the Ogerpon is going to give this Calyrex Shadow a bit of breathing room here, as it's going to redirect away the knockoff. So while we see the Psychic going into the Protective, the Urshifu, it would have been able to deal devastating damage, but Justin playing one step ahead on that first turn.
A smart move from Dawei. You don't have to guess exactly what the offense is, whether it's knockoff or Tailwind plus Surging Strikes. The Follow Me works either way and gives you a chance to KO the Urshifu in response. No Focus Sash on the other side would have just been a KO into Urshifu. And having the knockoff land into the Ogerpon doesn't take away that opportunity for the next turn either. Didn't do so much damage that you're worried about it. The only risk is something like Acrobatics, but then that means you're not getting speed control, and the Urshifu would move after the Calyrex Shadow Rider. So still the easy play for a Follow Me and a Psychic if Dawei wants to make it.
Calyrex Shadow Rider is still going to be the fastest thing on the field right now. The Roaring Moon, yes, it does have that booster energy, and it can go for the Tailwind to help boost up this Urshifu, but Shadow Rider Calyrex is still one of the fastest Pokemon in the format. We see the Terastallization commit onto the Ogerpon, so giving that +1 to its attack with the Embody Aspect ability, but you're also going to be able to look at removing something like that Grass-type weakness if you are going to redirect away something like the Acrobatics. You leave yourself a bit more vulnerable, though, to an Urshifu with the Surging Strikes, as Justin sort of shakes his head a little bit, but with the Tailwind, now you get a chance to see this Urshifu really go all out on the offense.
Because it's the choice of Tailwind and Surging Strikes, the Terastallization ends up being negative value, right? Terastallization is spent just to make a move super effective and have the Ogerpon go down. So a high cost there to create a safe turn for this Calyrex Shadow Rider. What will it do with it?
Calyrex Shadow could just go for a Psychic here, but instead goes for the spread damage on the Astral Barrage. Both of these Pokemon going to take at least a little bit of damage, but that Urshifu gets knocked out to a critical hit in one go. That's something that the Psychic would have accomplished, but you don't mind being able to get your KO that way either.
Right, and getting the Grimnay boost, that starts to even out what could have been a really strong lead for Justin. If Urshifu had stayed on the field, and now with Tailwind up and the threat of Follow Me removed, things look really, really difficult for Dawei to fight back. But now Surging Strike's taken off the field, and the boost onto Shadow Rider threatens more damage. So now you can make plays like a defense. There's no defensive Terastallization available on the Shadow Rider anymore, though, because the Fire Terastallization was used. So it's very vulnerable to knockoff, and of course, was already faster without the Tailwind, definitely faster with the Tailwind. And Amoonguss comes in at the right time to answer Dondozo on the other side, making life once again pretty difficult for Dawei. You're going to need to protect or switch the Calyrex this turn, and that just leaves Dondozo to fight one-on-one against Amoonguss. So maybe a trade of like Protect and Yawn into Roaring Moon, just for Dondozo to end up asleep at the end of this turn.
Well, Protect is going to keep this Shadow Rider safe for now, as it is going to dissuade the knockoff coming through from the Roaring Moon. But you're right, Yawn versus Spore, you're playing some mind games here. And Amoonguss is going to move first because the Tailwind is active from the Roaring Moon. Dondozo not allowed to respond on this turn of Pokemon.
Dondozo will use its first sleep turn now, but the pressure of the knockoff, meaning that Dondozo has to fight against Amoonguss, the one Pokemon that on Justin's side that it really does not want to have to end up against. That means there's also no pressure relieved from this Calyrex Shadow Rider. Nothing has changed about the situation. The knockoff is still going into that slot. It means there has to be a switch now, but the switch just opens up, knockoff and Spore into that slot this turn as well.
The switch is going to reveal that the fourth and final is Whimsicott. How does this change anything right now? You've got the knockoff into the Covert Cloak, but Whimsicott could just offset the Tailwind.
If you needed one Pokemon to switch into Knockoff and Spore, there was not a better option probably in the game than Whimsicott. It's a surprise to see it at the end, but it's a sign of hope for Dawei to stay in this game. Manages to lose the Covert Cloak. You're not worried about that. Take very little damage to Knockoff and block the Spore. It can also match Tailwind to try to get the Calyrex Shadow Rider faster. Now the problem is that Roaring Moon is still a defensive problem as well. There's not a threat of a KO from the Shadow Rider onto the Roaring Moon, and so you want to land a Moon Blast from Whimsicott into that Roaring Moon. But if you go for Tailwind, you may just go down to Acrobatics before that can happen. So it may be that you can only have one or the other. So I think the Moon Blast is probably more important in the short term.
Yeah, but if you don't have the Tailwind, then that Roaring Moon is going to outspeed your Shadow Rider Calyrex, as we already saw those speeds play out in the first couple of turns of this game. We see the Terastallization committed from Justin, though, onto this Roaring Moon. Terra Flying to boost up the power of an Acrobatics and also reduce its weakness to something like those Moon Blasts, but Dawei doesn't go for it. Opts to lean into the Tailwind to make sure you get a couple of staggered turns when Justin's Tailwind is going to expire on this next one. Has to sacrifice the Whimsicott in the process, but Dawei gets that open spot to bring in this Shadow Rider Calyrex without needing to take a Spore. Dondozo wakes up and hits a fissure. Amoonguss goes down in one hit, and that's a huge way to even up the Pokemon count in this game one.
Well, the odds may have been low, but they're never zero. The one turn sleep, the 1 in 3 to wake up there, and then the 40% chance to hit the fissure, just so unlikely, but lands it and starts to even out this game. The Terastallization also may have been a mistake. We talked about the defensive problem that Roaring Moon was. It is no longer a defensive problem as a flying type. It's completely vulnerable to Astral Barrage, and of course, Calyrex Ice Rider, now forced on the field without Terastallization available because it was spent on Roaring Moon, is weak to Astral Barrage. So this is going to be a Life Orb boosted, super effective and neutral Astral Barrage at whatever point Dawei wants it. And meanwhile, Dondozo's still very comfortable here. It dealt with the only really big problem in the way for it, which was the Amoonguss. It does not mind Calyrex or Roaring Moon at all. It can take so many turns to withstand their attacks with leftovers healing it back. Dawei fully in the driver's seat now to win this game after the combination of the Terastallization and the wake into Fissure.
You can see that Justin Tang is kicking himself right now for not having that Terastallization available, but also having to be on the receiving end of such a low odds turn. Dawei goes for the Astral Barrage. Calyrex Ice Rider is able to protect itself, but this Roaring Moon is not. It's able to hang on, though, with just a sliver of HP to be able to go for a knockoff, and that's going to be able to deal the final blow to the Shadow Rider Calyrex. But can it be enough when this Dondozo is able to resist these glacial lances from this Pokemon and still go for a Wave Crash to finish off this low HP Roaring Moon? Dawei gets the targeting right, and that's going to matter a lot for the final turns of this game.
Really significant that Astral Barrage plus Wave Crash was enough damage to pick up the KO there. Of course, it wouldn't have been into Dragon and Dark type Roaring Moon, but easily is into the Flying type. And now, it will take some turns to happen, but if you have to imagine a Fissure is inbound, Calyrex needs so many turns with no boosts to deal a KO into Dondozo, who will be getting Leftovers recovery in the meantime, can protect itself to get even more Leftovers recovery. There's still 7 power points left for Fissure. One of those is bound to hit, and even Wave Crash might be enough to just slowly whittle down the Calyrex, whichever way Dawei wants to approach it. It feels like this game is in their hand.
It really does. Dondozo without a Tatsugiri, proving that it can still hang with some of the biggest horses in the Regulation G race. Justin just buying a little bit of time to go for the protect on this Ice Rider Calyrex. Dawei sees another path to victory that makes it a little bit easier, going for a yawn into that Ice Rider as well.
Right, you don't want to lose too many of the Fissures if that's the game plan into protect, and so yawn lets you target them into sleeping Calyrexes. Justin, meanwhile, wants to burn away those power points and hopes to catch one with a protect. For now, though, it's just yawn and high horsepower.
High horsepower, look at how little damage it's going to be doing to that Dondozo, and that Leftovers is going to mitigate that damage even more so. Now that the Tailwind has expired as well, Justin has no choice except to give up this game, and we're going to go to the next one where Dawei is up 1-0 in this best of 3 in top 4.
Right, Justin saw what was inevitable there. The protect was going to come from Dondozo, end up with Calyrex asleep and healing more and more from Leftovers, which just then gives Dondozo uninterrupted time to go out on the offense either with Fissure or Wave Crash. There was no way for Calyrex to come back and win that game. We mentioned it before the set that the Dondozo was going to be the crucial piece, and totally evident in that game. Once Amoonguss is dealt with, it's so difficult for Dondozo to be handled, especially when you look at Justin's brings. The Urshifu, the Roaring Moon, and the Calyrex, the 3 of them together could have a few uninterrupted turns and wouldn't deal with Dondozo. They all 3 have so much difficulty dealing damage into Dondozo that once Amoonguss was gone, it was a problem. The other missing piece was a knockoff into Dondozo, could have at least removed Leftovers, made it easier to deal with Dondozo over the course of several turns, but Justin was trying to use the damage threat into Calyrex to really force the position from the other side, so never found time for that knockoff.
And that turn that just played out there kind of sealed the deal. That turn 1 wake up from the Dondozo into the Fissure hit into the Amoonguss immediately just left every other piece easy to take on. And so Dawei heading into this next game, do you feel confident to be able to run back that game 1 game plan, or do you have to think about Justin making a big change that might throw that off balance?
It definitely felt precarious. I don't know if Justin needed the Flying Terrestrialization for the Acrobatics KO and the Whimsicott, but if you don't get that, then things are a lot easier in the long run. It also needed the 1-turn sleep and the Fissure hit, so not too surprising to see Dawei shift it up, knowing that she may have gotten away with one in that game 1.
Well, where there's a will, there's a way, and sometimes where there's a Fissure, there is a victory. Dondozo making an appearance in the lead next to the Tinglu for Dawei to switch it up. But Justin, comfortable running back the Roaring Moon and the Urshifu, and that early Terrestrialization commit. This has been a very quick turn number 1.
Has to get away from the risk of surging strikes into Tinglu. Justin sticks with the same leads that offer great offensive potential into Calyrex Shadow Rider, but they also can control these 2 Pokemon pretty well with Knockoff to get rid of Leftovers, Taunt to deny things like Yawn and Stealth Rock, and really limit what these 2 can do in the early game.
So how can they actually work in this first turn? Stealth Rock negated. Yawn into the Roaring Moon is still a potential here, but you have to worry about that next turn where Urshifu, Roaring Moon still at full HP, and Urshifu can just taunt the Dondozo now.
We get a preview of Justin's team. There's no Calyrex Ice Rider in the back, so recognizes that it was going to be difficult to find the right position for it against the Calyrex Shadow Rider. But that means you're playing an uphill battle when you leave your restricted Pokemon at home. You're starting off that uphill battle pretty well with that first turn. For now, Roaring Moon needs to get away from the Yawn, go into the back, and that means Amoonguss is hitting the field against 2 Pokemon it quite likes to go up against. It can Spore either of these and is not at too much risk.
But look at this Dondozo taking the surging strikes here. At this point, Justin's trying to get out as much damage as possible. But something that you and I were talking about is that if you have to leave your restricted at home, Justin's team is the right team to do it. Look at the rest of the offense that this team is going to provide, despite the fact that that Ice Rider Calyrex is not in the back. Ruination is also a great way to soften up this Amoonguss, and with the follow-up of the Yawn as well, you're putting this Amoonguss on a timer.
You're putting Amoonguss on the timer, but Amoonguss is a great Pokemon to come in and take a combination like that, because when you switch it right back out again to undo the Yawn, the Regenerator will undo half of that Ruination from the previous turn. And because the leftovers are now missing off of the Dondozo, those Surging Strikes start to add up. If you're doing that while leftovers is undoing them over time, it feels a lot worse. But knowing that the Dondozo is a really big obstacle for you in the long run, being able to chip it down with the knockoff damage and the Surging Strikes and not having the recovery is really significant. Now Amoonguss can flee, can get the Regenerator, and bring Landorus back on the field.
But that's just the thing about that strategy, is that you do force the Amoonguss to have to pivot back into its Pokeball, bring something else out, and that's something that Dawei can actually plan around, forcing that Amoonguss off of the field. Yes, this Dondozo is getting a little bit lower from these Surging Strikes, but you still have to take 2 more sets of that from the Urshifu alone in order to actually get the KO. Tinglu is free to go for the Ruination. Landorus becomes a much easier target as Dawei continues to slow the pace of this game down by angling a Yawn towards his Urshifu. This taunt is going to get shaken off now as well.
Taunt is gone. You can kind of see the theory behind Dawei's team with how these turns are playing out, because all these Pokemon are getting whittled down so much that when Calyrex Shadow Rider hits the field, something like Landorus would ordinarily be able to take one Astral Barrage. That's not true anymore. Something like Amoonguss might be able to take a hit, but won't be true if the Stealth Rock was limited, so there's not quite as much damage coming in. But Justin's really going to have to make a play soon before everything is just vulnerable to the Shadow Rider, and getting Roaring Moon on the field is a piece of that.
Ooh, Landorus going for the Earth Power. The Dondozo is finally felled, but Justin got put in a position that you have to bring the Roaring Moon out now and make sure that you can set up something like the Tailwind. The Ruination is still going to hit again. Roaring Moon down to now half HP. It still is going to be that Dark typing as we see Dawei make this Pokemon choice. The Shadow Rider Calyrex finally ready to make an appearance in this game too.
One key difference from Game 1 is that because Roaring Moon was yawned and switched back out and came back in again, it has lost its booster energy, meaning that it's slower than the Calyrex Shadow Rider. Still, Calyrex Shadow Rider doesn't have the offense in this position to get the KO on it, but that's a problem Tinglu can solve. Tinglu not under much threat from either of these Pokemon. You can easily protect or sub and have the Tinglu start to whittle down these Pokemon to get them both into Astral Barrage KO range. We saw one Astral Barrage, I believe, into it in a previous game, did only like 25%, so it's going to take some time to get there. You can't risk a knockoff before then, and Terrestrialization has already been used.
But how good is that going to feel, being able to get that Astral Barrage into something like the Landorus on the other side? The 4th and final Pokemon for Dawei is revealed to be that Ogerpon Hearthflame in this game too, and is also going to protect. You can see Justin excited about that protect on the other side because it gives him a free turn to go for the Tailwind without a threat of this Landorus getting knocked out. Sandsear Storm coming out could miss this Ogerpon, but we do see it connect, and so Ogerpon takes a huge chunk of damage when it's switched in.
Takes a huge chunk of damage, but the Tailwind is so crucial. Both of these Pokemon now faster than both of Dawei's, where the inverse was true before Tailwind. Justin recognizing the one opportunity with Roaring Moon still healthy enough to survive an Astral Barrage, meaning that Dawei was going to need to play a more passive turn, and pouncing on it with a Tailwind to try to push into the advantageous, into the position of momentum. Now, the Ogerpon has to follow me to get rid of threat from the other side, but there's still not enough damage threat coming back.
Yeah, I mean, look at that, the knockoff into the Ogerpon. We saw that it was already going to do a decent amount of damage, so I'm not sure how much that crit actually mattered, but it means that this Calyrex is free to be the target of an enormous Earth Power. Astral Barrage, when this Calyrex is still up and kicking, is going to get a knockout onto the Landorus, but the problem remains this Roaring Moon. What can actually outspeed it now?
Nothing can outspeed it while Tailwind is up, and you'd ordinarily just want to bring in Dondozo and protect while Dondozo went after the Roaring Moon, but Urshifu is there. You cannot protect in front of Urshifu. Justin can make a play of just throwing a knockoff into the Calyrex Shadow Rider while also throwing an attack with Urshifu, and know that that means the Calyrex Shadow Rider will never get a chance to attack again. I don't think Tinglu can win a game 1v3.
what attacking moves does it really have? It has Ruination, and it also has Sand Tomb. It has the access to set up something like Stealth Rock, but any of those moves are going to start to have a degenerative effect on the damage output. Ruination can only do half damage with what is remaining in terms of the HP, and Sand Tomb takes a while. Can it even hit the Landorus? At least you were able to take that out, but you still have to be able to get that through something like an Amoonguss, which is basically full HP in the back.
Knockoff will also give an opportunity to remove the Rocky Helmet to stop the recoil back into the Urshifu, making this a little bit easier for now. Team Blue just going to protect itself though.
Protect itself for now, but then the Roaring Moon at least has to hit into the protect. The Shadow Rider Calyrex very vulnerable. This Urshifu is able to go for the Surging Strikes, and just one is going to be enough to get that critical knockout, and Dawei is left with just the Ting Lu versus 3 Pokemon on Justin's side. It looks impossible.
Right, yeah, I think this game is all but over. We saw that the knockoff moves first, so it's safe to just water, terrestrialize, go for Surging Strikes and knockoff, pick up a ton of damage with no recoil coming back. So Justin takes game 2, evens up the set, and takes us to a deciding game 3 in this semifinal.
But precarious nonetheless. So as we take a look at this game 2 and look back on some of these critical turns, Justin had to get that one Tailwind turn just right when that Shadow Rider Calyrex protected to be able to have that free and clear.
He got it right, but it was also completely safe because of the defense that Roaring Moon offers. We mentioned before the set that Dawei opts here for Psychic and Astral Barrage and Substitute, so not great coverage options, meaning there was no damage threat into the Roaring Moon on that turn. That is Justin's main advantage and a kind of linchpin of this strategy in this game, because he gives up so much switching around, where all the Pokemon are so low that if Calyrex Shadow Rider gets a chance to have uninterrupted control of speed and just go out on the offense, then it's going to lose Justin the game. But the defense of Roaring Moon buys time for the Tailwind and flips that to let him easily pressure these Pokemon down. I think Dawei's going to need a better plan for the Roaring Moon in the next game. The Ting Lu and the Dondozo lead also don't do it very quickly. It's first seemed like it was starting to, right? The yawn forcing the switch, get rid of booster energy, but you aren't accomplishing damage that way. You're only accomplishing kind of pivoting and mitigation of the initial threat without solving how eventually the Calyrex Shadow Rider deals with Roaring Moon.
The Ruinations felt like they were adding up, but I think you needed 1 or 2 more on that Roaring Moon to really put it into that Astral Barrage range. Let's get into our final game between Dawei C and Justin Tang, as one game separates them from being a top 4 or a finalist at the San Antonio Regional Championships.
So no adjustment from Dawei, back to the Ting Lu and the Dondozo lead that we've seen before, but now there's a Landorus on the other side instead of Urshifu. That means Taunt is not threatened. Stealth Rock is there if Dawei wants it, but she could also opt to just start getting Ruination into the Roaring Moon, like you mentioned, get it lowered down a little bit more. Options for Wave Crash into the Landorus aren't so bad, and of course you don't really want an Earth Power into Dondozo, so it protects itself now.
That means that it's going to stave off the knockoff. One of those big critical adjustments Justin made in that game 2 to make sure that this Dondozo was a bit easier to deal with, but it was a double up into the Dondozo that Dawei is able to stall out with that Protect, and Stealth Rock now set up every time Justin makes a pivot. Those stones are going to start to stack up damage.
Yep, they'll amount to some damage. I think it's not the highest cost to pay for a double target into a Protect, and now you're free to make that double target again. So yeah, knock off into Dondozo. Wouldn't be surprised to see the Earth Power just clicking up really significant damage and chipping down this Dondozo.
Earth Power to follow up there. Yeah, takes the Dondozo to below half HP, but with the Ruination, oh, it's gonna miss. That is going to be a move that does not have 100% accuracy, so Roaring Moon gets bailed out this time. With the yawn, though, may force it off of the field and to lose that booster energy.
I don't think it's so bad for Roaring Moon to go off the field to wait to fight the Calyrex Shadow Rider later. And Landorus is now threatening a KO into Dondozo with Earth Power, and with no yawn on it, it's not pressured off the field. Ting Lu may have a chance to get more Ruinations, but this could easily play out in a similar way to the last game, where the Roaring Moon flees this yawn, waits for Calyrex Shadow Rider to come out on the field, and Landorus does the damage necessary to kind of force the issue, get us out of this early game, and get us to a position where Dawei has to start out on the offense with Calyrex Shadow Rider.
It's tough because Dondozo doesn't even get a chance to move before this Landorus. Otherwise, you think maybe I go for something like a Fissure, just try to fish for that, but it's the Earth Power that hits into Dondozo and knocks it out before it gets a chance to move, and Dawei, just like that, down to 3 Pokemon in this final game of the top 4 set. Ruination does actually connect this time onto the Landorus, so it's gonna go down to 50% HP.
Landorus weakened, definitely in Astral Barrage KO range, but the threat of Yawn is gone. So much of the game one advantage for Dawei was the Yawns that she stacked against Justin, the switches that they forced. That threat is gone. Justin now can slow things down a little bit. Sometimes you can just get scrambled against Dondozo and Ting Lu, but the risk of that is much lessened now. But yeah, Calyrex Shadow Rider comes on the field at this moment where Roaring Moon isn't there, but you know it's lurking in the back, waiting to make life difficult. Hasn't been chipped at all yet, which means it's a big problem for the Calyrex Shadow Rider. Now, one difference from game 2 is that Terastallization hasn't been used yet. The Urshifu forced it early as a Fairy Terastallization onto Ting Lu, but that hasn't happened to this game, meaning that at least the Calyrex Shadow Rider could use the Dark Terastallization to mitigate knockoff damage in the future.
But is there actually enough damage on the field right now for Dawei to be able to get through this Amoonguss before it puts something to sleep? This Ting Lu is going to take some time, but you know that the threat of that is there with this Amoonguss.
Substitute a very, very big risk here, though. If it's Switch and Spore into Calyrex Shadow Rider, then a sub is a huge leap in positioning for Dawei.
It's going to be the Roaring Moon switch first, as we see the Landorus go back into its Pokeball. Dawei playing it safe, so it's just a protect in front of this Amoonguss that would have loved to put it to sleep. Ruination into the Amoonguss is going to make sure that it's a little bit easier to pick up the KO later, but it's going to be the Spore actually into the Ting Lu. So now a big deal here for the Ting Lu to be off, kind of out of threat right now.
Yeah, I think a really poor turn for Dawei. You can see what she was hoping for with the targeting going into Calyrex Shadow Rider and just skipping it with Protect, and then getting the chip damage into Amoonguss that makes an Astral Barrage threat into Landorus and Amoonguss. But because it's pivot into Roaring Moon and no targeting at all into Calyrex Shadow Rider, now the position is really poor. Your support next to Calyrex Shadow Rider is asleep and cannot help, and the knockoff threat is incoming to the Calyrex Shadow Rider, and you might expect that even if it tries to sub to block a Spore, knockoff and into a Dark Terastallized Shadow Rider might still be enough to break Substitute and allow the Spore to land.
Well, Ting Lu asleep, not going to take its mandatory turn just yet. It is the Ogerpon. Would have been the perfect target to be on the receiving end of something like this Spore, so it wouldn't get put to sleep. But here's the Terastallization. This Calyrex going to be a bit safer now from a knockoff that you know is something that Justin really wants to at least be able to get rid of this Life Orb and make this Shadow Rider Calyrex's damage a little bit easier to deal with. Amoonguss going to Protect first, though, before we see the rest of this turn play out. Take a look at the Astral Barrage. This Roaring Moon is going to be perfectly okay with this outcome. As you see the Astral Barrage come out, and take a look at this Roaring Moon. It's going to take very little damage, which is such a different story than what we saw in that game number 1. While we see the Roaring Moon finally get a chance to fire off this knockoff. It's going to take a couple, though. That was a crit, so more damage than you would have liked to see from Dawei.
More damage, but I think a missed opportunity for a Tailwind there. The Astral Barrage plus targeting from Ogerpon might be able to bully down the Roaring Moon at this point. Amoonguss just protects itself, doesn't want to go down to Astral Barrage and give up a boost. But you know, something like Tailwind and losing Amoonguss might have positioned Urshifu on the field. I think this is the kind of positioning Dawei needs to leap back into this game, because Ting Lu probably is never a factor again, given that it's sleep in the back, and if it comes on the field as the last Pokemon, it will need very little left on Justin's side to win. So Dawei needs to take the most advantage she can of this position, which may come down to that calculation of can Ogerpon and the Calyrex Shadow Rider together do it, but for now, not the offense. Just follow me to support the Calyrex.
Means that you at least are able to get rid of a Spore, but look at this Calyrex Shadow Rider with enough HP to be able to go for a substitute, so it keeps itself a little bit safer. I don't even know if a knockoff is going to be enough to actually break the substitute, but Amoonguss going for the Pollen Puff is a critical hit again. Justin maybe getting a little unlucky in that game number 1, gets more in his favor for this next turn.
Could be helpful damage. Dawei may be expecting Tailwind can't be stopped. So if you're not going to be able to stop it, then having a substitute during it is really helpful. But I think the Tailwind really critical for Justin to flip these speed advantages. Means that Urshifu is such a huge problem for Dawei now, because it'll be the fastest thing to move on the field, most likely, and threaten a KO into whatever it wants to go after. Likely, it's even a KO into the substitute Calyrex, with the first hit breaking the substitute and later hits finishing the KO. And so it's going to be really difficult to play around. But if Dawei can get past the Tailwind or just deal the damage through it because of the substitute, there's still some opportunity here.
I mean, if there's a switch, though, Dawei might be able to make a read to expect that it's going to be the Landorus or the Urshifu on the other side. And then maybe you're able to get a huge KO. As we see the Roaring Moon just go for a protect, maybe this is a bit of an opening that Dawei needed. Roaring Moon not as big of a target anymore, but you're not taking advantage of it because the Ogerpon's going for the protect with the spiky shield as well. Astral Barrage, that will be able to pick up a KO onto the Landorus, and you're going to be able to get an increase to your special attack, but then what?
So the idea here for Justin is Landorus goes down, gives you an easy avenue to bring Urshifu in, because you cannot risk actually switching Urshifu in. If you can get, we know from the previous game that Roaring Moon is faster than the Urshifu, so with Follow Me still being threatened, you want to have the Roaring Moon able to threaten a KO into the Ogerpon, so that then Urshifu is free to Surging Strikes the Calyrex. The Spiky Shield then on the previous turn to safeguard the Ogerpon from any damage may have prevented that. If Ogerpon is bulky enough to take an Acrobatics, then it will also be able to redirect the Surging Strikes, which would open up an Astral Barrage that would be really problematic for Justin. So we have to see what it's going to be. For now, it is a Terastallization into Flying. Has to amplify the damage of that Acrobatics to try to finish the KO onto Ogerpon.
Justin's doing a little bit of a fist pump right now. Seems to be very confident in the play that's about to come next. With the Follow Me on the Ogerpon, the Terrifying to boost up in Acrobatics on this Roaring Moon. Is this going to actually get the KO that he needs to leave this Shadow Rider on its own? And it is! Ogerpon gets knocked out, and now the Urshifu is free and clear to target down this Shadow Rider Calyrex, even behind this Substitute. Surging Strikes, one hit into the Substitute is going to be that critical hit necessary to break the sub, and you get a chance to see these final two strikes deal enough damage to get the knockout onto this Shadow Rider Calyrex, leaving Dawei down to just the Ting Lu, and Justin one Pokemon away from moving on to the finals, where he has to face his team building partner.
Wow, so delicately played. You can see the positioning building up ahead of time. Justin knows he needs the Tailwind, knows he has to deal with the Follow Me, knows that he needs both Roaring Moon and Urshifu on the field at the same time, but builds that position, and then it all culminates with the Acrobatics KO into Ogerpon, letting Surging Strikes get through the Substitute and get the KO, leaving Dawei with nothing but a Ting Lu and no chance. So Justin into the finals of this regional championship. So impressive, that play.
Take a look at the emotion that's on his face. Justin, somebody that tasted so much early success in his VGC competitive career. First regional, getting the win. Second regional, winning that again. Something that no other VGC player in the Masters division has been able to accomplish.